I know many of you get angry at IFG and Curate, so let's address that head on. I know we talk about investing and opening access to all, but when you're on board with us, you're hit with warnings like this, and you have to qualify as a high net worth and sophisticated investor, which ultimately means that only 0.5%, if that, of our audience is actually able to invest with us. I get it. That's not particularly open to all, is it? Well, folks, I really wish that instead of this, I could show you an onboarding experience closer to this, where I could just tick a box saying that I'm 18 and chuck in a driving license and I'm ready to gamble. But unfortunately, that's not the case. And today's video is about taking you guys behind the scenes and showing you how broken our financial regulatory system actually is when it comes to gambling, and also when it comes to investments as well to a lesser extent, and how something that may actually make you a lot of money has ended up being so heavily restricted, investments, while an activity which you're 99% likely to lose money is actually given a lot of freedom and marketing, which is gambling. And folks, let me be very clear from the very outset. Regulation works and it is vital, and this is not a video about saying we need to get rid of all regulation. And that's because regulation protects people and it makes sure that people are making informed decisions. So this video isn't really about cutting regulation on investing, though I will be making some comments on how I think it could be improved. But this video is about dramatically increasing the regulation and the restrictions around gambling. And before you say, oh Ibrahim, this isn't a Muslim problem though, really, is it? Because it's only Larry and Benjamin down at the bookies. Well, here are my two answers. Since when do we only care about problems that are destroying lives if they don't affect the Muslim community? As Muslims, we care about all humanity. And second, you really think this isn't a Muslim problem? Take a look at the location of this bookies. It's on the heart of Melbourne Road in Leicester. It's been there for years, and it is basically at the heart of the epicenter of Islam in the UK. You've got IDA on one side and you've got another big masjid right opposite, and between these two enormous masajid where people come from miles away to visit, out of the city, out of the country sometimes to visit, in Leicester, which is itself a really heavily populated Muslim area with over 50% of the Leicester community is now ethnic minorities. In that area, if we have a gambling shop that is thriving, I think we as Muslims have a problem as well. The UK has been long considered as one of the largest regulated gambling markets in the world. But behind the scenes, the gambling industry's powerful lobbying efforts have made sure that regulations remain lax. According to reports from The Guardian, UK gambling companies spent an estimated £10 million each year on lobbying alone. To give you a sense of that, the entire budget for the Conservative Party was around 30 odd million, and the Labour Party was around 30 odd million to actually spend on the entire election. So every single year, the gambling industry is spending about a third of that just for one industry. So this lobbying has naturally led to a political environment that favors the gambling industry. So take, for example, the 2005 Gambling Act, which was intended to liberalize gambling laws. So for example, one key area that that act enabled was that it permitted gambling companies to advertise on television and radio. Since then, the gambling sector has ballooned to become a £14 billion a year industry, according to the UK Gambling Commission. But who's really winning here? Spoiler alert, it's not the people. Before we go into all the studies and the reports that detail the harms of gambling, what does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu innamal khamru wal maysiru wal azlamu rijsum min amali shaytan. رجس من عمل الشيطان فاجتنبوه لعلكم تفلحون. And he also says, إنما يريد الشيطان أن يوقع بينكم العداوة والبغضاء في الخمر والميسر ويصدكم عن ذكر الله وعن الصلاة فهل أنتم منتهون. For Muslims, it's quite clear. Maisir, often translated as gambling, is completely haram. There's no difference of opinion on this issue between the scholars. Scholars define gambling as an activity in which a player voluntarily transfers money or something else of value between themselves. But this is not a transaction necessarily. This is a transaction or an activity that is contingent on the outcome of some future uncertain event. Aha, Ibrahim, this sounds a lot like investing as well. Isn't that what happens with stock trading and crypto as well? People put their money forward in the hopes that it goes up. Sure, look, on the risk side, in trading and in gambling, you can both lose money and you can gain money. But there is a really fundamental difference between the two of them from a sharia perspective. And that is, when you are investing, you are actually buying and selling something of value. You're buying and selling a chunk of a business or a chunk of a property, whatever you might be doing, buying and selling commodities. Whereas with gambling, what are you doing when you're betting on a horse? You're not actually buying a stake in the horse. You don't own anything from the horse. You're buying and selling the chance that the horse will win or come in a certain position. And the counterparty, the opposite side of that transaction, is Bet365 or William Hill or whichever bookie you're using. They're the one who are going to be winning if you lose, and they're the one who are going to be losing if you win. And that isn't necessarily the case when you're buying and selling an investment or a house, because there you both come together and you're buying and selling on the basis of your own decisions. The person maybe selling has made a nice profit over the last several years and is now ready to sell on to you. So here we're dealing with actual substance, and that's the critical sharia distinction. The second key point is that in gambling, it's a zero-sum game. There is a winner and there's a loser in every transaction. And most of the time, the winner is not you. The winner is the bookie, is the house. And that is very different to investments, where both people can actually end up winning as well. It's usually a win-win transaction. Look, those are the main points, and there's definitely some more key differences, but overall, Islam encourages investing, as many of the wealthy Sahaba were very savvy investors. But the key condition is that money can only be put into halal investments, and it can't be some kind of zero-sum game where you're buying and selling chance or risk. If you'd like to learn more about halal investing, hit the subscribe button and join us as we aim to raise the Muslim financial literacy standards across the world. Back to the analysis on regulation and gambling. Look, while those companies are profiting massively, the cost to society is devastating. Studies conducted by the Public Health England body estimated that gambling addiction leads to an annual societal cost of £1.27 billion, factoring in mental health issues, crime, job losses, and many other things. And yet the industry's efforts have managed to keep meaningful regulation far out of reach. In fact, as of 2023, it's estimated that around 430,000 adults in the UK suffer from gambling addictions, with many more at risk. And despite these alarming figures, the gambling lobby has successfully delayed reforms and ensured that key regulations such as betting limits on online platforms remain incredibly lenient. Just listen to this clip where a whistleblower blows open the lid on how gambling companies prey on the most vulnerable.
With 21st century technology, the punter doesn't really know what's going on. And behind the scenes, there's all of this maths going on that analyses your betting and ensures the company wins. It will always win. Customers would be categorized based on their profitability. So if a customer lost millions of dollars, they would be labeled a VIP, and only the best staff would talk to them. But if you were a problem customer, that meant that you were winning money. So you'd be labeled with a big badge that said that you're a problem, and that needs to be dealt with. The risk rating is done by an algorithm. It's just how much they've lost against whatever other metrics the company's decided. The risk rating essentially turns off winners and stops them from betting, and cranks up the dial for anybody that's losing so they can lose more and more and more money. It's actually a design feature to ensure that those that lose are allowed to lose more.
And despite this being a known thing, nothing is done about it, and restrictions are minimal, and it gets worse. If you've watched live sports in the UK, chances are you've been bombarded with gambling ads. In 2020 alone, UK betting firms spent £1.5 billion on marketing, including TV ads, sponsorships, and online promotions. While the Advertising Standards Authority has placed some limits on gambling ads, such as restrictions on targeting children, the industry still finds ways to dominate our screens. Nearly half of the Premier League football teams are sponsored by betting companies, and their logos are splashed across jerseys, stadiums, and uneven players. And if we have all of these figures on the harms of gambling in society, why is nothing being done? The answer is simple: money. That £10 million that we mentioned that is going into lobbying to ensure that gambling regulations remain loose, even if it costs many people their lives and their livelihoods. Now folks, let's compare that with the investment sector where we operate. Under the FCA rules, investment firms face strict advertising regulation to prevent misleading claims. All promotional materials must include warnings about potential risks, and firms are prohibited from using celebrity endorsements to promote high-risk investments. You see these disclaimers, capital at risk, and dozens of risk warnings plastered all over financial services ads, and you must have seen them all over our investment platform, Curate Capital, as well as the really robust onboarding questionnaire you all have to fill in when signing up. Now you know why. Look, I'm actually completely in agreement that we need to have a really robust regulatory framework around investments. And there's good reason for that, because people end up losing money in these investments and can get scammed as well. But unfortunately, we have an outdated regulatory framework and a very underfunded regulator, which is why it gets outdated very quickly. Because you see, regulation comes in after some kind of major scandal has happened where people have lost money. So at that point, a whole bunch of regulation comes in to stop people losing money again like that in the future. But the problem is this: that thing has moved on. The horse has already bolted, and now you're shutting the door. It's not really going to make a difference. And because the entire landscape has changed, you're actually focusing on something that isn't really that relevant. So I'll give you an example. We had the mini bond scandal, and as a result of that, where pensioners lost a lot of money, the FCA and the government started to really focus on private markets and making sure that there was a lot of regulation around that. But what happened was, actually the entire industry of scammers and people who are in that business of trying to get people to lose their money, they moved on, and that went to crypto. And then crypto was completely unregulated for several years, where scammers made hay whilst the sun was shining, and then the government and the FCA finally caught up, and they're now starting to regulate that space. But scammers have already moved on to pastures anew. And so the point I'm making is that I sometimes share your frustration as a consumer as well, that you might have these absurd situations where you see relatively low risk investments such as real estate or property and other relatively low risk investments that are heavily regulated and are heavily protected by various different restrictions, and then someone can go and invest in penny stocks. Whereas you see other investments on publicly listed markets which are relatively speaking pretty lightly regulated, because the FCA and the government are still kind of thinking that those markets are very, very safe still. But actually the world has changed. So as you can see folks, because of underfunding, because of being slightly behind the curve, we've ended up with a regulatory framework that does protect people, but it might be unsuited and unfit for where we currently are as an economy and as a world. But the real question is, where are these same protections where we are erring on the side of caution when it comes to gambling, an industry that actually loses people money every single day of the week? Why are we not erring on the side of caution there? Why do we have such a stark regulatory imbalance between these two sectors? It all comes down to influence. The gambling industry's deep pockets have allowed them to keep pushing against stronger rules. And by the way, the gambling industry preys on the working class. You don't see gambling shops in upper class areas and the rich areas. The gambling industry makes money from poor people. And that's most likely why, by the way, the investment industry, which caters primarily to people who have some money, why there's so much restriction and regulation around that, because the middle classes have the clout to be able to make sure that they're protected, whereas people who are poor, working class, it's much harder for them to get those same regulations. And the gambling industry continues to take advantage of people who are making rash decisions without much education around the risks, and that is leading to these people staying in poverty for the long term. In fact, a study by the Social Market Foundation found that despite growing public concern, the UK's gambling regulator, the Gambling Commission, has not been given adequate powers to tackle these issues. Meanwhile, the financial regulator has much more control over misleading and harmful investment advertising, and rightly so. But the thing that we are missing out here is that even in the financial industry, the people who are looking to scam people and make people lose money are by and large not HSBC Bank or Barclays Bank or Curate Capital Capital or whichever large asset manager you're talking about, these people are professionals and they're looking to try and do the right thing 99.9% of the time. The people who are actually misleading and scamming people are sat in overseas countries, are scamming you on Facebook, who are pretending to be people like myself and making you lose money. And that is an area that us as a country and as a government, we unfortunately have not really found a way to properly regulate that. Instead, we are regulating those who are by and large not necessarily going to try and scam you in the first place. So the net result, folks, is you've got a situation where we are regulating heavily something that is good, and we are not regulating heavily at all and have no idea how to regulate the scammers. And because of the gambling industry's lobby, we're not regulating very much another area that is losing people money that really should be regulated and restricted heavily. The time for change is long overdue. Public opinion is shifting as financial literacy increases overall, and many experts are calling for the UK government to strengthen gambling regulations. The House of Lords has even recommended banning gambling sponsorship in sports and restricting online betting, which is a very welcome start. But until stronger rules are implemented, the gambling industry will continue to grow unchecked and rake in billions at the expense of ordinary working class individuals and families. So what I would love each and every one of you to do is to raise this with your local politicians. Why gambling companies are still allowed to thrive in our communities. And people of Highfields, of Leicester, come on guys, get that betting shop kicked out of Highfields. That is a parasite at the heart of Melbourne Road. I mean, how is it as a community we haven't sorted that out yet? Why is it still there? Have a stern chat with all the uncles who use it. Get them the help that they need as well. What a complete joke, guys. We talk about religion and we've got people in that area who are walking around in pristine white thobes and going to the masjid 5 times a day. But if we can't solve this societal crisis that is on our doorstep, what are we doing? That's it for today, folks. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum.